Why don't we get to wildfires? Lots of news there.
Yes, indeed. So there has been an ongoing push to tie federal aid for recovery from these horrific wildfires in LA to forcing them to bend basically to Republican political priorities. Trump floated this in when he visited LA. I'll get to that in a minute. But Mike Johnson, Speaker Mike Johnson, obviously very sort of pivotal in terms of this direction, also saying that he agrees with the specifics of what Trump wants to tie this disaster funding to. Let's take a listen to that.
ID as a condition for aid to California. Is that going to be a red line for you? Will you insist on voter ID in exchange for aid to California?
Yeah, we've got to work out the details of that. I have not spoken to the president about that issue since he said that. He'll be here tonight, of course, for dinner with us, and that's one of the topics of discussion. Listen, there are a lot of issues going on in California, and we have been lamenting the lack of voter security there for some time, election security. We were deeply concerned about it in this last election cycle, and we saw 3 of our seats, frankly, slip away from us in the weeks that it took to continue counting ballots in California when seemingly every other state and nation in America can get it done. It's inexcusable. Gavin Newsom provides, I think, such a lack of leadership there in so many ways, and it was highlighted by the disaster with the fires. It's so heartbreaking that California citizens are suffering because of the lack of state and local leadership on those issues. They did not manage the forests well. They did not manage the water well. And everyone knew for decades that the eventuality that we've seen over the last couple of weeks here since the fire disasters began was foreseeable. They assumed the risk because of their crazy far-left policies. So we've talked about conditioning the aid that will go there to policy changes. I think that is a common sense notion that is supported by the vast majority of the American people who do not want to subsidize crazy California leftist policies that are dangerous for people.
This is, of course, echoing some of what Trump said when he was on the ground, also bringing up specifically voter ID. So not even anything to do with fire management, but just, pretty directly tied to we don't like the way you vote. You hear Mike Johnson there say 3 of our Republicans slipped away. We lost these 3 races and we're upset about it. Pretty wild to just directly tie it to political outcomes that they're unhappy with in the state. Here is Trump when he was on the ground singing a similar tune.
I want to see 2 things in Los Angeles: voter ID so that the people have a chance to vote, and I want to see the water be released and come down into Los Angeles and throughout the state. Those are the 2 things. After that, I will be the greatest president that California has ever seen. I want the water to come down and come down to Los Angeles and also go out to all the farmland that's barren and dry. They have land that they say is the equivalent of the land in Iowa, which is about as good as there is anywhere on earth. The problem is it's artificial because they artificially stop the water from going onto the land. So I want 2 things. I want voter ID for the people of California, and they all want it. Right now, you don't have voter ID. People want to have voter identification. You want to have proof of citizenship. Ideally, you have one-day voting, but I just want voter ID as a start.
Voter ID as a start. And just a minor correction, that was actually when he was on the ground in North Carolina later in the day. I believe he went to LA. I got one more clip from Trump saying that he is sort of floating the idea of getting rid of FEMA altogether, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and leaving disaster aid solely up to the states, which is, no state in the country is equipped to be able to handle the disaster relief on the scale of what we're talking about when you're dealing with these repeated climate crises. Let's take a listen to what Trump had to say about that.
North Carolina gets hit, the governor takes care of it. When Florida gets hit, the governor takes care of it, meaning the state takes care of it. To have a group of people come in from an area that don't even know where they're going in order to solve immediately a problem is something that never worked for me. But this is probably one of the best examples of it not working. And there's been some others, like in Louisiana, etc. So we're going to be doing something on FEMA that I think most people agree. I'd like to see the states take care of disasters. Let the state take care of the tornadoes and the hurricanes and all of the other things that happen. And I think you're going to find it a lot less expensive. You'll do it for less than half, and you're going to get a lot quicker response.
This actually ties in, Saagar, with the executive order that we were talking about. This actually not an executive order, but an agency directive, I guess it was, that is being parsed and debated right now, and Counterpoints will cover in full tomorrow, but basically says that all agencies need to stop distributing all federal funds to any programs outside of those that go directly to individuals. So potentially included in that would be things like disaster relief. So, sort of ties in with these comments from Trump. And just one more note, I know we're all thinking about California after these horrific fires, but because you have so many red states along the coastline of the Gulf of America, I guess we'll say.
Yes, the Gulf of America, that's right.
That are tremendously impacted routinely by hurricanes. The bulk of FEMA money distributed goes to red states. So it would be red states that would be primarily affected. Not that that should matter, because I happen to believe that whether you vote for Republicans or Democrats, you should benefit from the federal government coming in to help you in your time of need. And I'm pretty sure that's something that most people in the country tend to accept.
I mean, I've gone on the record, I think, for this. Whether you look, obviously, I think voter ID is a good policy or whatever. If Congress wants to pass a law that requires it for the entire nation, fine. I would have no issue with that. But I don't think that FEMA money or any of that should be tied to it. I also think that it's stupid. Every single time we have a major disaster, Congress has to come through and pass like some special supplemental, as opposed to just actual checks that just kick in. Again, philosophically, California is the biggest economy in our state. Federal policy, federal revenue-wise, they probably pay more than any other state into the coffers. So Alabama, which, and I don't like talking this way, but it is true. Most of these states, Alabama, Mississippi, or whatever, are downwardly mobile and are almost certainly more beneficiaries of recipient tax dollars than they are paying into the system.
That's correct.
It would be genuinely outrageous. I would say this about Texas too, which is also a G15 economy in and of itself. If there's a Biden administration and they're like, oh, you need to implement ESG, I'd be like, okay, yeah, we'll just take our oil and go somewhere else. Same with California. So I feel the same way in terms of neutrality for overall disaster relief. We've got 30 million Americans, I think, who live there. It might be more, 30-something million, 1/10 or so of the entire U.S. population that lives in the state. I think we should just give
many of them Republicans, by the way.
Yes,
they vote for Democrats.
We shouldn't even have to talk this way. It's not about Republican, Democrat. They're citizens. Many of them, again, tax-wise, have paid more than anybody else into the federal coffers. So when they need to be bailed out, I think we should bail them out. And in general, tying this political stuff to disaster aid is really bad policy, because like we just said, you could easily foresee some future Democratic president who said, if there's a issue in Texas, they're like, okay, well, you have to pursue green energy. And they're like, okay, well, we don't want to. So what are they supposed to do? It's a bad policy to set it this way.
Well, and the voter ID thing is particularly crazy because, I would find it objectionable to put any conditions on it, even if it was like, you have to do the water management in the way that we want. But at least that would relate.
Yeah, that's right.
In theory.
Well, okay, look,
to fire management,
fine, The water thing, if it's real, I don't know nearly enough about water. I've tried to read about it. It's way too political the way that it is. But if theoretically that was genuinely what caused it, okay, I could live with it. But the voter thing and anything generally political, again, if we want national voter ID, fine, pass it through an act of Congress. I'm totally fine with that. But conditioning aid to each state specifically to compel behavior is very different, for example, than the national, what was the thing that set the drinking age at 21? They're like, oh, if you want your highway dollars, then you have to do that. Right. Okay, I don't even love that per se, but at least that's one that applies to all states. Singling out an individual state, it seems wrong.
And very clearly being like, we don't like how you voted, so you're not going to get our help is crazy. I mentioned this before, but one of the things that really radicalized me against Democrats is when I lived in Kentucky, which had trended to the right and had just elected a Republican governor, and they were passing all kinds of legislation through that was getting rid, like implementing quote unquote right to work, which is anti-labor and attacking pensions, whatever. I got a lot on Twitter of like, well, screw those people, they voted the wrong way. And I just think that once you start thinking that way, it's like the end of the country. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's over. Like, we may as well just break up and dissolve if it's just going to be, retribution against states and counties and cities that don't vote the way that you want them to, it's a very bad direction to go in. Yeah. There were some additional sort of underlying pieces here that have come out after the fires that have really caused additional pain and suffering for people there, and helped to explain why, for example, the fire department in LA County, among other reasons, why they were under-resourced at this point. And we can put this up on the screen. This was actually from Ben Norton tweeted it out, but this was from Matt Stoller's Substack. He had a guest author on who I believe is a antitrust attorney, something like that, who wrote a long piece about the fact that U.S. fire trucks, their costs have skyrocketed because a private equity firm bought up the manufacturers and made a monopoly. You can put the piece up on the screen, and I'll give you some of the details here. So the cost of fire trucks has skyrocketed, going from $300,000 to $500,000 for a pumper truck and $750,000 to $900,000 for a ladder truck. Just in the mid-2010s, we're not talking about like the 80s or 90s, we're talking about the mid-2010s, a decade ago. Now, they've skyrocketed to around $1 million for a pumper truck and $2 million for a ladder truck, and not to mention the time to even get some, if you can afford that and you're willing to shell out the cash, the time to actually take delivery, receipt of that truck has gone to now being between 2 and 4.5 years. Used to be less than a year. And the TLDR here, and I recommend you read the piece because it's very instructive, not just about fire trucks, but about so many problems within our economy, is that a private equity firm called American Industrial Partners decided to roll up the fire truck industry, forced prices up across the board, consolidated all these previously like regional sort of like small manufacturers. Originally, they had all this propaganda about, oh, we're going to continue to allow you to operate in your facilities and you're going to have your own brand and we'll just be like the parent company and you guys are going to do your own thing. But they've long since dropped that act. They've significantly reduced capacity, like factory capacity, in order to actually build and deliver these trucks, spiked the prices, and now you have an industry that is just, tremendously consolidated, very little competition, very little choice. So when these fires struck, over half of the LA Fire Department's trucks were currently out of service. And part of that is because of this price, they weren't able to replace the trucks. And then even things like being able to get the parts from these same manufacturers gets wildly more expensive. You add on top of that, they had seen budget cuts that we talked about before, and you end up with a situation where even as the fire risk has obviously dramatically increased in this era of climate crisis, they are significantly under-resourced and unable to even marshal the equipment necessary to be able to combat the fires that they would need.
It was really interesting, actually, to look at that. There's also been this price gouging that we should mention. Put it up there, please, on the screen. One of the things that we immediately flagged here at breaking points, but the rent has now risen by some 20% across LA counties after the fires, even though that's actually in direct violation of the legal limit of 10%, which is meant to be an anti-price gouging maneuver that kicks in terms of disaster. But the real issue is that the housing stock has now obviously massively shrunk in some of the richest areas. There are huge question marks about insurance, property tax, the ability to even rebuild, and then whether a lot of those people even want to rebuild. I mean, as I said, if something like that happened to me, I'm done. I'm not paying all that much income and property tax just to be screwed whenever it actually matters, whether it's private equity, whether it's lack of investment or whatever. We can all agree that it was completely incompetent the way that it was run. And so put that together and you're just seeing a real crisis of what I would say is like capital L liberalism. Like these cities, San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York and others have relied on this like weird balance of like progressivism through rhetoric, but NIMBYism and rich people that come together. Yeah. And LA is now the best example of this is one of the greatest places in the entire world. No one can dispute that weather-wise. It's incredible. And that you have the dynamic effect of the city. You've got land, you've got sun, you've got all this stuff happening. But the fact is that if anything, its resources are a curse that enables all of this bullshit to like surround it. And what we see here now is there's huge question marks as to whether they're even going to change their housing policy. Now, I'm not some universal YIMBY person. I'm actually skeptical of a lot of this, like we all need to live in a box, 5-minute city, stuff, etc. But California and New York are the places where I'm like, guys, this is undeniable. It clearly is not working when you have millions and millions and millions of dollars and the average salary is like $100,000 with 13% income tax rate. It's like, how does this shit even work? So I think they need to ask big questions. And if we're gonna tie federal aid, I would like it to be tied to something like this and be like, yeah, let's make sure that normal people can actually live here, you know, instead of just either bailing out the ultra rich or just accelerating, accelerating building pathways for the richest residents who lost their homes, as opposed to lowering the price for everybody. Look at what has happened in Austin. This is where a red state is genuinely beneficial. They don't have all this YIMBY bullshit. Rent in Austin is down 23% over the last 3 years. That's incredible. And it's literally just because they built a shit ton of housing everywhere. Houston, not the most beautiful city. It's cheap to live if you want to live there, you know? Listen, you know, it's one of the only places that made me want to maybe have some zoning laws, because it's like, should an auto body shop be next to a single family house? I don't know, but that house is pretty cheap and the people there seem to like it. It's one of the biggest cities in the country. That's been my main takeaway from this LA situation.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.